The cashier held my debit card up to the light like it was stolen. My daughter stood behind me in the pharmacy line and spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. Mom gets confused, she explained sweetly. We set spending limits on her account for her safety. The line of neighbors shifted, interested, pitying, a little smug. My card declined with a cheery beep. I stared at the screen, at the total for my arthritis medication. Not extravagant, not unnecessary, not anyone's business. I can pay cash, I said, digging for bills with hands that shook more from humiliation than age. Paula leaned close, nails immaculate, voice syruped for the audience. Mom, we talked about this. You can't keep buying random things. The cashier looked relieved, another crisis handled by a responsible daughter. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I signed the paper receipt with a pen that wanted to blot, and the pen won. People pretended not to watch us leave. In the parking lot, Paula took my arm and squeezed a little too firmly. You scared me in there, Mom. We've got to keep a handle on your finances before something happens. Back at the car, I pretended to search for my sunglasses and instead flattened the receipt on my thigh. There, below the total, was a tiny line item I'd never noticed before. Monthly advisor fee, Harlow and Pierce, $19.95. I knew every vendor who had ever touched my money, and I had certainly never hired anyone with a name that looked like a law firm invented in a soap commercial. At home, I found the envelope from the credit union where my pension landed every first of the month. I'd written to ask why my balance kept coming up short. The letter was bright and polite and unhelpful, MS. Alvarez, as per your authorized transfer schedule to H&P Advisory and the healthcare autopay approved by your financial caregiver, the account is functioning as designed. Financial caregiver. I had never assigned one. My name is Nora Alvarez, I'm 69, and I worked 34 years as a municipal accountant. I balance budgets people thought couldn't be balanced. I survived a widowhood that emptied the house and filled my toolbox. I keep my receipts. I do not forget agreeing to a financial caregiver. I walked down to the little credit union anyway, because the walk helps my knees and because the tellers have known me since I used to bring in cookie tins on Fridays. Maya, the young woman with the bicycle helmet hung on her chair, was working the window. She greeted me with a smile that contained something like concern. When she asked for my ID, I slipped the pharmacy receipt beneath it. Her eyes flicked to the tiny feline, then up to me, then back down. She tapped her keyboard harder than necessary, then printed a general account activity sheet that showed nothing beyond what I already knew. She handed it over, and when I turned to go, she coughed softly and pushed a sticky note across the counter with the heel of her hand. Check POA file. Power of attorney. She'd risked her job to warn me. I tucked the sticky note in my pocket and reached for the door, thinking I had just found the first person who believed I wasn't confused. What I didn't know yet was who had filed a power of attorney for me without my knowing, and how deep the authorization had gone. Victor is my son-in-law. He sells wellness packages to stressed executives and printed t-shirts for his motivational retreats in our garage, and always paid for dinner with a flourish when there was an audience. In private, something about him was always calculating who owed him what. He and Paula had moved into a rented townhouse across from the middle school and hosted family brunches where the bacon was undercooked and the conversation was well done. In the weeks after the pharmacy scene, the humiliations multiplied like dandelions. Paula changed my phone's lock screen to a picture of us where I looked particularly small and texted in the family chat, "So proud to keep Mom on a schedule, no more late-night online shopping." My nephew added a thumbs up. My sister, who lives 2 states away, sent a single red heart and then called me privately to ask if I was forgetting words. I swallowed my replies like bitter seeds. At Bible study, the women adjusted their smiles. "It's hard to accept help," one of them said, patting my arm. At the grocery store, a neighbor whispered, "Nora's daughter is a saint." They set up something called a guard wallet. He told the butcher like I wasn't in earshot, so she doesn't get scammed. I stared at a pork roast and reminded myself that fury is not an argument. The rule of the world in our town was simple. A polite story, told often, becomes the truth. The story hardened when a letter from the Social Security office arrived, addressed to me but written to Representative Pei. According to the letter, a request had been made to have my monthly check managed by a Pei, my caregiver, because of documented cognitive decline. My hands went cold even though the house was warm from the soup simmering on the stove. Documented. Who had documented me? In the same mail pile sat a glossy brochure for Brighthaven Memory Suites, circled in blue pen. A sticky note in Paula's handwriting stuck to the front, just in case, Mom. Near us. I wish I could say I confronted them immediately in high moral clarity, but the truth is that aging brings a specific shame wrapped in fear. The fear that everything you do will be interpreted as proof of what they say you are. I made coffee and burned it. When Paula and Victor came by that evening with my grandson Lucas, the one bright star in this whole mess, Paula walked straight to my kitchen and picked up the brochure I had left on the counter. "No pressure, Mom," she chirped. "It's voluntary. But we worry." Victor spread his hands like a benevolent contractor. "It's just safer this way. Plus, with me as rep pay and caregiver, I can handle your bills." He winked at Lucas as if he'd just given me a pony. "Who filed the power of attorney?" I asked. Paula's face arranged itself into concern. "You did, Mom. At the notary last month. Remember? You were tired. I handled the paperwork." My stomach dropped. The rule of the world struck again. If a paper was stamped and filed, it exists more solidly than the truth. The next morning, the credit union flagged my debit card and sent a text, attempted transfer of $1,200 to HNP Wellness LLC over daily limit. Victor's last name is Pierce. His cousin's initial is H. I sat awake that night until the house creaked into silence and the refrigerator hummed like an old friend. I am not fearless. My hands sometimes refuse to thread a needle, and sometimes grief still catches my breath without warning when I see my husband's watch in the dish by the sink. But I have one weapon Paula and Victor underestimate. I know the weight of paperwork. I know how records fit together like bones. And I know the difference between real signatures and the kind my grandson once traced to get out of field day. At 2 a.m, I turned on the old banker's lamp in my little study and made a list. Step 1. Call legal aid first thing. Guardianship requires clear evidence of incapacity, not just inconvenience. Step 2. Visit the credit union and request the POA file under my name. Step 3. Ask my doctor to provide a cognitive assessment. Step 4. Gather bank statements for 6 months, especially new vendors, ACH transfers, and anything Harlow and Pierce. Step 5. Speak to Maya, if she's willing. I put the list on a clipboard because old habits comfort me. Legal aid assigned me a young attorney named Mr. Chin who sounded overworked and allergic to nonsense. "Mrs. Alvarez, guardianship is supposed to be the last resort. Courts prefer narrowly tailored solutions," he said, already in motion. "Do not sign anything else. We'll also petition to suspend any new POA until the hearing." He asked me questions that made me feel seen rather than small. He told me to do one thing that felt like swallowing a bitter pill. If you can bear it, lean into their narrative for a week. People who seek control tend to get careless when they think they already have it. That afternoon, I went to see my doctor. I answered questions about presidents and serial sevens and short lists of words. I recalled all 5 words when he asked again. He smiled. "You're fine. I'll send a letter." I asked him to copy me. He nodded gravely, as if he understood that sometimes a letter is the difference between alone and protected. Maya was waiting for me at the credit union in a cardigan too thin for the air conditioning. "You didn't get this from me," she said, pushing a folder over the counter with a deposit slip on top to hide it. Inside were printouts, an executed durable POA naming Victor as agent, notarized with a signature that looked like mine had learned ballet, a CareGuard wallet application with primary caregiver, V. Pierce, and financial caregiver, HNP advisory, an auto transfer authorization to HNP Wellness, LLC for $1,200 monthly. My breath hitched. "I never signed these," I said. Maya's jaw tightened. "Check the notary stamp. It's from Victor's cousin's office." "That's not illegal, but convenient." She slid another paper forward, a timeline of advisory fees. The first fee had posted 3 weeks before the notary date. "Mrs. Alvarez," she whispered, "I shouldn't say this, but my aunt nearly lost her pension to something like this." People come in with a story and a stack of papers and a smile. She swallowed. "I can email these to your attorney if you like." I nodded, feeling that strange mixture of despair and relief when the bad thing is finally specific enough to fight. I walked home slowly to think. Victor called that evening, and I put my phone on speaker and set it under a tea towel on the counter. "Hey, Mom," he boomed, "we'll come by tomorrow to organize your medication. The doctor posted a refill for that sleep aid you like. You'll be so relaxed." "No sleep aids," I said lightly. "You should sleep like a baby," he insisted, and then, thinking he was funny, added, "and sign like one too." Paula laughed in the background and shushed him. My chest cooled into something like purpose. I've never liked traps, but sometimes the only way out is through. 2 small victories arrived by noon the next day. Mr. Chen filed an emergency motion to freeze any new transactions under the contested POA until the hearing, and the judge signed it. And Lucas, who is 12 and sees more than adults think, bicycled over from school, sweating and earnest, with a folded paper from his backpack. "I think Mom took something from your desk last night," he said, cheeks flaming. The paper was a printout from our neighborhood Facebook group. A doorbell camera had captured Paula entering my house at 11:47 p.m. with a key, leaving 12 minutes later carrying a blue folder. My blue folder containing my original healthcare proxy naming my sister and my end-of-life directives. It wasn't a will. It wasn't real estate. It was me on paper. It was enough. That evening, when I opened the file cabinet to review my insurance documents, my heart fell through the floorboards. The life insurance beneficiary change form I kept blank for emergency updates was gone. Victor's voice from last night seemed to echo under the lamp's hum. "And sign like one too." For the first time in days, I allowed myself to cry, not because I felt helpless, but because the people I'd loved were collecting me like a set of keys. I wiped my face, made tea, and copied the video file from the Facebook post to a thumb drive. A record remains a record even when the ink is tears. Family members prefer private embarrassments. Abusers prefer soft rooms and closed doors. Paper prefers fluorescent lights and microphones that record. The courthouse on Maple Street has carpet that smells like coffee and history. On the day of the hearing, the gallery held an unusual audience. 2 of my church ladies pretending not to be there, the butcher's wife, my neighbor who runs the daycare, Maya in a blazer that belonged to a friend, and Lucas in the last row beside Mr. Chen's paralegal. Paula and Victor arrived with their family-friendly financial advisor, a tall man with bleached teeth who introduced himself as Richard Harlow and shook the bailiff's hand like he was at a charity gala. The judge was a woman around my age with hair that did not pretend to be younger. The court clerk read the petition. Victor and Paula claimed I was no longer able to manage my finances or health, that I had made irrational purchases, had misplaced important documents, had compromised judgment, and needed a guardian. For my own good. The judge asked me to speak. My knees wobbled when I stood, then locked into place, because I have stood through worse storms. "Your Honor," I said, my hands steady on the podium. I didn't forget anything. Something was taken. Mr. Chen took over. He did not roar, he arranged. He presented the doctor's letter attesting to my cognition, the emergency order freezing the contested POA, and a neat stack of bank records. "We begin with an advisory fee charged 3 weeks before any signed authority existed," he said, tapping the page, "and an auto-transfer authorization executed under a power of attorney notarized by the petitioner's cousin's office." He held up the advisory agreement and let the quiet multiply. The primary caregiver listed for CareGuard Wallet is the petitioner himself. The beneficiary change request for Ms. Alvarez's life insurance was faxed from the petitioner's home printer at 2:14 a.m. 6 nights ago. I turned my head just enough to see Paula's lips whiten. Victor's attorney stood to object, voice smooth. "Your Honor, families manage these things informally all the time. Ms. Alvarez is clearly struggling. She has a history of anxiety." The judge held up a hand. "Present evidence or sit down." It felt like a window opening in a stuffy room. Mr. Chin called Maya. She described the account notations and the push to accept a third-party control. She looked at me once, and I lifted my chin a fraction to thank her. Then he called the pharmacist, who explained that someone had attempted to refill a sedative under my online account from an unfamiliar IP address at 1:09 a.m. We flagged it because the patient declined it at her last visit, she said. The screen logs showed the username, Nora A plus guest. The judge's pen paused. Finally, Mr. Chin played the audio recording of Victor's chirpy call, "You'll sleep like a baby," and sign like 1, 2, and then asked the clerk to display the neighborhood doorbell video. Paula went pale as her midnight cameo rolled for the room to see. The judge sat forward. "Mrs. Pierce, did you enter Ms. Alvarez's home and remove papers?" Paula's mouth opened and closed. "We were helping," she said, but it landed with the dull thud of a child's excuse. Then came the turn I hadn't planned. Richard Harlow, who had been smirking at his cufflinks during most of the testimony, requested to make a statement. He claimed his firm had merely provided elder support services and displayed a printed agreement with my looping counterfeit signature. Mr. Chin didn't object. He walked to the counsel table, picked up another document, and handed it to the clerk. "This is the business registration for Harlow and Pierce Advisory and HNP Wellness," he said. "Both list Mr. Harlow as registered agent and Mr. Pierce as managing member. Public records show the companies were formed 8 months ago. Bank statements show Ms. Alvarez's advisory fees began 7 months ago. The notary date on the POA is 6 months ago." He looked up at the judge. "In other words, the advisor relationship predates any alleged consent and profits directly from it." The judge's voice lost its warmth. "Mr. Harlow, Mr. Pierce, remain for a moment after this hearing. Clerk, prepare a referral to the district attorney for potential financial exploitation of an elder and forgery." In the gallery, someone exhaled loudly, the butcher's wife, perhaps, and Maya's knuckles unclenched on her notebook. The judge turned to me. "Ms. Alvarez, I am denying the petition for guardianship. I am voiding the durable power of attorney executed under questionable circumstances. If you wish, we can appoint a neutral conservator for 90 days to ensure your accounts are restored and protected." I thought of the humiliation in the pharmacy line and the tiny advisory fee that had been the pebble in my shoe leading me here, and I said, "Yes, Your Honor, temporarily." The reversed weakness I'd been advised to embrace suddenly made sense. By agreeing to oversight, I had taken control where they expected passivity. Paula stared at me like I had turned into something inedible at her table. As the hearing adjourned, Lucas stood up in the last row. He hadn't spoken a word, but now he looked at his mother with something new in his eyes, weighing and observing, like a boy deciding which family story he would pass down. For a second, it looked like Paula was going to call my name and plead for privacy. Instead, Victor touched her elbow toward the exit. A deputy intercepted them, polite but firm. The room went quiet in that stunned way after a lightning strike when you can smell the ozone. Consequences arrived not with a drum roll, but with envelopes and appointments. The district attorney's office opened a file. The credit union reversed the last 2 transfers to HNP Wellness and froze the account associated with their LLC pending the investigation. The life insurance company voided the attempted beneficiary change. The neutral conservator, a woman named Margaret with sensible shoes and a dry sense of humor, sat at my kitchen table and said, "We'll take this 90 days like a tune-up, Nora, not a takeover." She set up 2-factor authentication for every account and left me with a binder labeled in friendly block letters, "My systems." Paula called once, cried, said things about pressure and stress and Victor's ideas, and asked if I could loan them rent. I listened without interrupting. "No," I said quietly. "But Lucas can come for dinner on Tuesdays." There was a long silence. "I can do that," she said finally. The district attorney eventually charged Victor and his cousin with attempted exploitation and forgery. Paula avoided charges by cooperating and turning over the missing documents. The restitution checks will probably bounce for years, but that's not the kind of math I do anymore. I said yes to the reporter, and then to the community center, and then to the credit union's request to run a monthly workshop. I called it Paper and Power, and on the first evening 30 people showed up, including 2 men with thick farmer's hands and a woman who had never had an email address until her grandson set one up for her at the back of the room. I printed checklists in large font and taught them to notice the tiny line items, advisory fees, caregiver apps, autopays that sound like kindness and taste like control. At the end of each session, I place a thermos of coffee on the table and leave it for anyone who wants to talk privately. Sometimes the story is the same song in a different key. It still matters to sing it. Lucas sits at my table on Tuesdays and asks questions about spreadsheets because he has a math teacher who makes numbers feel like a puzzle. His favorite casserole is chicken and rice with too much pepper. He helps me label the workshop binders and told me, with that honesty kids wear without knowing it's armor, when you stood up in court, Grandma, I felt taller. I didn't tell him that I felt that way too. The house is the same. The air smells like lemon oil and cumin and paper warmed by a lampshade. The bank folder sits on the shelf within reach, thick but orderly, Century and Souvenir. Every so often, when the study is quiet and the light is right, I pull out the pharmacy receipt with the tiny advisory fee that first poked me awake. It looks like nothing. It was everything. I don't speak much about revenge because I'm not good at the language of fire. What I can say is that justice showed up in sensible shoes and asked for proof, and I had it ready. I don't know if Paula will ever stop telling herself a version of the story where she was only trying to help. That is no longer my burden to carry. My job is to remember that one clear sentence can redirect a river. The sentence was not I became stronger. It was no. And some evenings, when the neighborhood is quiet and the streetlights make halos on the pavement, I close the blinds, set the kettle on the stove, and straighten the binder labeled My Systems. I think about the dozens of seniors who will touch its tabs in the coming year, and I wonder what line item will save them. I hope it's the one that says, in neat capitals, ask for the file.